The year is 1862, and the United States is a nation poised at the crossroads of an uncertain future. The Civil War was taking a heavy toll, both in terms of lives lost and the destruction of infrastructure. Its aftermath leaving the country distressed and in a state of healing and reconstruction. Years earlier, in 1849, an accomplished merchant named Asa Whitney wrote a memorial to Congress titled, "A Project for a Railroad to the Pacific." Detailed within it was a comprehensive plan to build a railroad from the East Coast to the West that would allow merchants like himself to sail the western route and easily access all of Asia. While he petitioned until 1851, his plan was initially denied. Under the reconstructive needs of Civil War America, however, the idea was reopened, and the Pacific Railroad Act was passed in 1862, and by the time the railroad was complete, the United States would never be the same. A major turning point in U.S. history, the first transcontinental railway rapidly impacted the cultural makeup of America, the unification of the country, and the future economic prosperity of the United States. Such easy and rapid communication, with such facilities for exchanging the different products of the different parts, would bring all our immensely widespread population together as one vast city. Asa Whitney. The Transcontinental Railway was the manifestation of our country's common goal of westward expansion, physically and culturally connecting the United States. Stanford professor and historian Gordon H. Chang says this in an interview by Reconnecting Roots on YouTube.
And the Transcontinental Railroad in particular was of paramount importance because it physically and metaphorically linked the two coasts, the country together after the divisive Civil War.
Prior to the construction of the railway, travel both to the east and west was a time-consuming and dangerous process. This meant that America was split into several segments based on how far you could reasonably travel by coach. Once the railway had finished construction, the time to travel from coast to coast was reduced from the great 8 months to a mere 4-day ride, making the country feel much more interconnected. On November 10th, 1871, at 6:30 in the afternoon, we left Cross Plains and arrived in Madison at 6:35. Left Madison at 10 o'clock, arrived in Chicago on 11th at 6:45 in the morning. From the journal of Margaretha Schaefer, describing her leisurely journey from Wisconsin through San Francisco to Washington in just a few weeks. She could cross state lines within the course of an evening. According to James P. Ronda, a history professor and co-author of The West the Railroads Made, what the Transcontinental Railroad did was bring the West into the world and the world into the West, end quote. It not only physically connected the East and the West, but also served as a route for the flow of culture, ideas, and information. The trains brought people closer together and fostered the shared American identity. This growing interconnectedness was pivotal in fueling the industrialization of the United States, particularly in the eastern states. The unified push towards manifest destiny in America led to the discovery of plentiful raw materials in the western states. Materials such as steel and coal fueled the industrialization of the East, but without a reliable mode of transportation for those raw materials, the economy was limited. The connection of east to west via the railroad was a central factor in the industrial boom in the U.S. during this time period. Businesses can now access broader markets, leading to increased sales and economic expansion. In his Reconnecting Roots interview, Professor Gordon Chang exclaims, "And now you can have California strawberries as we do today all across the country because of the railroad." As the country industrialized, it also experienced an urban and real estate boom. Industrial hubs emerged along the rail lines, contributing to urbanization as people flocked to these areas in search of employment opportunities. Approximately 7,000 towns and cities across the country began as Union Pacific depots and water stops. Cities such as Pittsburgh and Chicago prospered primarily because of their position on the rail lines. In fact, the sports team Pittsburgh Steelers got their name from the city's steel mill heritage. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the population of California grew by almost 200,000 during the construction of the railroad through 1860 to 1870. Despite its undeniable economic benefits to the country, The construction of the Transcontinental Railroad came with a heavy price. That price was labor. The two primary companies responsible for the construction of the railroad were the Central Pacific and Union Pacific Railroad Companies. When the railroad was completed on May 10, 1869, these companies had hired thousands of laborers, including more than 20,000 immigrants. 20 dynamite charges were ignited to blast a rock cave, but only 18 went off. The white foreman, thinking all the dynamite went off, ordered the Chinese workers to enter the cave to resume work. Just at that moment, the last 2 charges exploded. An excerpt from the sole first-person account from a Chinese worker on the railroad in a book by Wang Haohan. In his journal, he details the horrors and hardships frequently faced by Chinese laborers. Stanford's Chinese Railroad Workers in North America project estimates that Chinese numbered 10,000 to 15,000 during the high points of construction of the CPRR. These workers were essential to the railroad and made up around 90% of the Western workforce. The Chinese workers were forced to labor for hours on end, 6 days a week, through any weather. Along with their terrible conditions, workers were treated very unfairly. According to the Stanford Project, Chinese workers cost between 2/3 and 1/2 of what white workers cost. Moreover, immediately after the railroad was completed, laws were made to expel the Chinese from the country and prevent them from migrating. The Chinese Exclusion Act, Section 14 states that hereafter no state court or court of the United States shall admit Chinese to citizenship, and all laws in conflict with this act are hereby repealed. In spite of the racism, Chinese cultural enclaves quickly began to emerge in areas where the railroad was being built, and eventually in cities across the nation. Chinatowns, with their distinctive architecture, cuisine, and traditions, impacted the country by introducing vibrant hubs of Chinese culture and community. And it wasn't just the Chinese. The Transcontinental Railroad influenced patterns of migration, drawing immigrants from many parts of Europe who saw economic opportunity. Among them were the Irish, who were drawn by the potato famine, Germans fleeing political unrest and economic hardship, and Italians escaping extreme poverty in southern Italy. All of these groups were essential contributors to the construction of the railway and left their mark on American culture, turning it into the ethnic melting pot that it is today. The impact of the Transcontinental Railroad reverberates through American history, leaving a significant mark on our nation's cultural mosaic. Chinese and European immigrants sprouted along the railroad tracks while working on the rails. Following the Civil War, the tracks served as a metaphorical glue that bound the states together. Economically, the railroad was the harbinger for a new era of prosperity. It propelled the United States into an era of global economic dominance. It's bewildering to think that, in less than a decade, the railroad has changed the face of the West. It has made travel safe and quick, it brought settlers to fertile lands, and it made once isolated regions thriving centers of industry and commerce. Though its construction was completed in 1869, the impact of the Transcontinental Railroad extends far beyond the 19th century. The changes set in motion by this ambitious project continue to influence the American landscape today. The lessons of unity, innovation, and the pursuit of a common goal remain relevant as we face new challenges and opportunities in the 21st century. The impact of these rails is best spoken by this excerpt from East to West from 1869. The new highway thus open to man will not only develop the resources, extend the commerce, increase the power, exalt the dignity, and perpetuate the unity of our republic, but in its broader relations will materially facilitate the enlightened and advancing civilization of our age. Thank you.